if you can bootstrap it and support yourselves through the development of your first title, that helps massively because you have 100% of that income from game sales coming in. You are in a place to negotiate deals and a much better understanding of what it is you want to do if you're making your first project and you're not familiar with publishing agreements and just understanding how much makes sense to give away. They can be really tough decisions to make because you have no context, you have no track record. That's an incredibly tough thing. The only thing I can recommend is definitely getting some legal support. We did not do that for our first couple of games. And there's lawyers out there that will help developers, especially if they know they're bootstrapping. They'll do some work for free up front. I know that's the case in the UK games space. So hopefully that's the case in some other countries. But making sure you have some legal support in your network, I think, is a useful thing. But yeah, if you can bootstrap, I would definitely take that approach. It's tough. It really helps you focus the vision on what it is you want to create. It's a sense of achievement when you get it out the door. But the converse to that point is that I have seen teams, first of all, the lean model of developing teams as a startup is the same, is applicable even when you're 12 years later and you're working on your teams. Like we have maintained a lean team. Like I said, we're still 16 after 12 years. So hiring for the specific skill sets that you need, maybe not trying to create a team just as friends because friends are there. If you have multiple of roles on a small team, that can lead to issues. But I think the larger thing that I see smaller teams doing is sometimes trying to create a small version of a thing that they know they can ship, which they may not be necessarily passionate about, but they know is achievable within the time and the money available, which is still an achievement. But more often what you see is that the game comes out and it doesn't really have an impact because it wasn't necessarily either a unique concept or it's pushed something forward. It's just, in quotations, a product that they shipped. And if that falls flat, it can be demoralizing. It's tough for publishers to buy in on their next title because the track record wasn't super strong. And all these things can be a factor. So either, I guess from my perspective, taking one or two routes, either brute force through it, make the title that you really want to make, and you'll have overscoped it and underestimated the time, and it'll be brutal and it'll be tough to get out, but you'll release and it'll be something you're proud of. Making sure that you are doing all the non-game development side of things, which no doubt you've had 100 conversations on this podcast about, making sure you market, making sure you're reaching out to press. Just, you got to do the business side of that as well as just making a great video game. So either you take that approach, or you do get early investment and you take some of the risk off the table. You make sure you budget for what you expect, especially for your first game. I'd probably then double that, and that's what your publishing budget would be. And then at least you have security and you still try and make something that you're super proud of. If you can get it critically well received, that really helps for your next publishing deal. But essentially it's just, okay, we've got one game in mind. Okay, now we've shipped one game. Now let's move on to the next game. And at least for us, we never built a studio that I foresaw a trajectory of 12 years. I mean, it was never not that, but it was always, let's just make a game. Let's make the best game we can. And then after that, it's like, okay, what do we do next? And it was always just that one foot in front of the other type mentality. So yeah, but it is tough. And I know that it's tough, and it is more likely even tougher than it was in 2012, because there was that wave of indie games coming out. As you said, we got the push of Steam Greenlight early on in those days, where developers were now allowed on Steam, and you could you had an audience there that was interested in looking for these smaller games. Epic was doing a lot to support smaller teams, especially in the early days, going from UDK to UE4. Sony was a big a big kind of backer of, I think it was like We Love Devs or something like that. It was some kind of indie focused push from from Sony, sorry. Again, around that 2014 time. So, yeah, it was easier to get caught up in that rush. So I appreciate the toughness right now of where the current industry's at. But like we said before, publishers are still making games, publishers are still signing games. For me, I feel like it's almost easier to sign the sub 500K game. So I don't know, call it $700,000 or something, like sub $700,000, or, 5 million plus dollar games. That middle area, which is actually where we land, is a tough market to be in. But yeah, it's definitely a great thing if small teams can create a little startup and make a game that they're super proud of.
Mm-hmm. I think the constant worry, at least for first time developers that are looking or seeking funding, is that obviously losing control, being rushed, right? I mean, it is a creative process. And then especially for that first game, it's hard to kind of estimate how long it takes to find the soul of the game, right? And as much, a lot of the failures of these startups is that they accept money and, that's the goal, is like, get the money, we're good, right? But then obviously a lot of them don't ship, a lot of them fail, or it's a countdown clock and everything feels rushed, everything feels incomplete. People are crunching, putting the heart and soul, and just crash and burn, right? So that I would love to kind of hear you kind of speak on those fears. Is like, well, the advantages that you kind of laid out is like, it gives you security. It gives you sometimes guaranteed time to keep the team together to kind of push this goal. It forces you to budget. It forces you to be more concise on your game design, right? As concise as you can be. But what would you say to these developers that haven't been through this process of funding, just thinking that anybody that are funding are evil, which just can't be true, right? What do you say to these guys with these type of fears?
So are you framing that in terms of how you should pitch your project to potential publishers? Are you asking how you kind of how you understand how to budget and scope your game before you've got investment? Like, what kind of direction would you like to take that in?
Either or. I think at the baseline is, I have this idea, I got this team, but I've never been through this funding. I just have this like general vague feeling about anybody that wants a piece of the game, wants a piece of the company, or more so about themselves than you. Obviously, that's for obvious reasons, right? And we just hear so many games, just crashing and burning before actually finding its footing and its soul, right? Which hopefully can be done within 6 months or 1 year of pre-production. But with games, it's such a enigma it's kind of foolish to kind of feel that way sometimes. It being such a creative venture, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think a few things on that is that definitely expanding your network, because there's a lot of really smart game developers that have written very articulate articles and posts on LinkedIn, things like this. Like, I only just came across Rami's blog. I forget the URL. I'm not sure if you know it, but definitely post that to your audience. He writes about a lot of just best practices when pitching. I noticed he has templates on how to budget your game. And just a lot of really strong advice, especially for new teams when approaching those publisher conversations, to the side about the creativity aspect and just understanding the vision of your game, I would definitely hold off publisher conversations, especially if you've not a team with a proven track record, until you know that vision of the game. And that can take a while. It can take some prototyping. Ether 1 started off as not Ether 1. Ether 1 became Ether 1 because we had to cut the game in a third. And Ether 1, there was still an Ether 2 and Ether 3, and we never went back to that. So we already knew we had to scope the game down by a third, and that's blatant in the name there. But it was also, a sci-fi, third person, more platformy puzzle game. We brought it into first person. Ether 1 still had some sci-fi elements, but then we introduced some more narrative themes of dementia with Lewy bodies. And then we also had themes of one of the family members having alcoholism. And we had these strong themes in there that were wrestling with each other. And it was only midway through development where we realized, okay, we need to strip this alcoholism theme out, not because it's not important, but we need to be speaking about dementia with Lewy bodies because that's the heart of the game. And we wouldn't have known that going into publisher conversations. We wouldn't have known that the scope was off. And I feel like even if you're able to spend 9 months just trying to prototype, start development, and just have a strong vision for the game before you start speaking to publishers, I think that will be beneficial to you as long as you can articulate what you believe the game is. It may shift and change after those publisher conversations, but at least open the publisher conversations with a clear idea about what you believe the game is right now. And you may get feedback and they may not understand certain acts in the story or certain core loops that you're trying to design or any of these things. And that's just good feedback. A publisher no is still feedback in terms of they may be not yet. I mean, it's generally never a hard no unless it's just not a portfolio fit, or it's just the types of budgets you're looking for are way too small or too big, conversely for them. So generally it's just a not yet type of thing. So don't get disheartened by drawn out publisher discussions. Again, going back to the point where they may just keep you waiting for a few months just to see what's out there. And it may, it's never a yes until that contract is signed. And I know a few people have said that. So I'm probably stealing multiple sources there. But until you have that publisher agreement signed and there's a contract, that publisher is not saying yes.